If I can ask Stephen, is the market hooked on the drug of 2-year fixed rates? What do you think?
That's a wonderfully loaded question. I think the drug of 2-year fixed rates. I mean, and you're right, it's a debate that rages across both the buy-to-let sector and the residential sector. The reason that so many 2-year fixed rates are sold is that they're very popular with consumers. And I have a personal view, having had many 2-year fixed rate mortgages, that it fits with people's time planning horizon, where they can see their life will be in 2 years' time, whereas they might not be able to see 5 years' time or 10 years' time. We don't all make decisions based on on sort of pure economics. Otherwise, we probably would all have 10-year or 25-year mortgages. The data that we have shows that actually within the buy-to-let sector, there's a lower level of fixed rates being taken than there is in the residential sector. That's across all our mortgage club data. And certainly within both camps, there is a move towards longer terms from 2s to 3s and 5s rather than just on 2s. But it's true to say there is still a preponderance. But I think it fits with people's planning horizons. And maybe buy-to-let landlords are no different in thinking, do I want to be tied in for a 5-year period in this property with this property in my portfolio, or do I want to retain the flexibility of being able to refinance or move or dispose?
It can, the criticism can sometimes be made that actually 2-year fixed are very popular, perhaps also with brokers. So is that something that you'd countenance, Stephen, that's largely fueling the 2-year market, because obviously it means extra business?
I've never really bought that argument. I think there's enough business around that brokers don't actually choose between advising customers on 2-year or 5-year. They do what's best for the customer.
And that customer in this case is a business investor who, is rightly, we hope, looking at all the parameters in their business judgments, including their funding costs, and I think, as Steve has said, having a view of which is perhaps 2 years out, not wanting to necessarily tie themselves down to a fixed funding cost that may actually prove in market terms quite uneconomic in the long term, seems entirely rational. But I mean, clearly, I think as John has said, I mean, there's lots of evidence that some people are opting for longer and let choice run.
Richard, what's your sense in the land?
Well, I think there is a sense that, like 6 and 12-month tenancies, two-year fixed rates are what people are used to, and so it's what they come back to time and time again. And I think Stephen is completely right. People do tend not to think that much further than the next couple of years of time horizon. But what we are seeing as the market matures, going back to the point that John was making earlier, this is still a very immature market. It's only been around for about 20 years. People are realising that property is a long-term business. We always tell people, if you're going into it, think about being in there for at least 10 years. And I think some are starting to look at longer-term planning, and they could be tempted by alternative packages. The important thing is it's got to be trust in the relationship. And one of the things we've seen over the past year is that lifetime deals are anything but. And as long as there is that level of distrust, then landlords won't commit to an institution if they can't trust them.
Right.
I think there's an interesting context here, which is that the information we have on landlords would suggest that the average hold of a buy-to-let property is 12 years. And with that planning horizon, I think there's an understandable move towards longer-term products. Our best-selling products at the present are lifetime trackers and 5-year tracker rates. And I think landlords are looking for better value over the full term of the mortgage. And there is a potential problem with 2-year deals, and particularly 2-year fixed rates. And we saw that prior to the financial crisis, when what you were getting was not really a 2-year fixed rate, but a 2-year discounted fixed rate, with the reversion rate stepping up quite sharply after the 2-year period. Now, the problem with that as a structure is that it can become very quickly unsustainable, because the customer may be tempted, in order to get best value, to remortgage every couple of years or so. And that means, of course, that in an environment such as we had prior to the financial crisis, that the lender is going to lose money, or the customer stays where they are on a higher rate, and they're paying a rate that is much higher than perhaps they need to. So a 2-year product has a place in the market, but I think, as the market recovers post-financial crisis, we have to develop and deliver a much better range of solutions for customers.
And the government's very interested, obviously, in more family-friendly tenancies as well, which perhaps would go hand in hand with these sorts of products. If landlords felt that they had a certain tenure with their mortgage provider, then perhaps they'd be happy to extend that slightly longer tenure to their tenants. So are lenders ignoring the interests of tenants from that point of view, that the products tend to have a much shorter term?
Well, you can see that without question there are more families being accommodated in the private rented sector. There's very good evidence for that. And you can certainly appreciate the argument that families with young children would benefit from greater security of tenure. What I'm not sure about is whether or not that translates into a willingness to also take on the obligations that are inherent in longer term leases. So for me, the case as yet is not a proven one, because I don't think we've seen adequate evidence that those families that are being accommodated in the private rented sector actually want to give up the flexibility of shorter term leases for the benefit of greater security of tenure.
Richard, so given the fact, that longer term leases seem to have vast appeal for the government, is there a case yet that a consumer lobby is out there actively battling on this to prove this case?
There's certainly a very strong consumer lobby. I don't think they've proved their case. We've done some research ourselves amongst tenants, and what we find is that regardless of the length of tenancy originally granted, something like 2/3 of tenants stay in the same property for more than 2 years, and nearly half stay for more than 4 years. Now, I think what our concern is that there is clearly a desire for tenants to stay in a property longer than they do. There is a desire for landlords to grant longer tenancies where they have the right tenant. And let's face it, which land business wants to lose a good customer if you know you've got one? Our worry is that while we've got an incredibly flexible tenure system, it's not used in anything like the flexibility. This is because it's assumed it can only be 6 or 12 months, when actually it could be as much as 7 years. Yeah. And I think we need to educate the market to what could be done. But equally, there are blocks on that, some of which come from the mortgage lenders who aren't prepared to allow a tenancy for more than 12 months. So I think what we need to do is to get the lenders to understand more their landlord customer, the market the landlords are working in, what their customers, the tenants, actually want. And what we're seeing is a desire for greater flexibility, greater ability, more longer tenancies, but not necessarily tenancies which tie them down for a period of time. And we need to try and find ways to deliver that, because in the end, that's how you get a more sustainable business. And I think just putting artificial blocks here and there because of a concern about risk is actually hampering the growth of the market and hampering some of that certainty that could be generated.
Well, John, can I just turn to you briefly? Because it's been said that lenders perhaps aren't being as flexible as they could be. So how would you respond?
It's an interesting debate, frankly. And I suppose that, again, to put this into context, if you look at our own criteria, we allow a variety of different terms of leases, up to 5 years, where we're dealing with private sector leases. We'll allow 3 years for corporate leases, but we limit ASTs to 12 months. Now, we're fairly open-minded about extending that, but what we don't see is any substantial shift in demand. Landlords don't ask us for longer-term leases, and all the evidence we have on tenancy demand is that they're not asking for them either. And it'd be odd for a credit committee to agree a change in criteria without there being compelling evidence that changing criteria is required. Now, one lender very recently, Nationwide, did change their criteria, not frankly in response to demand, but more in response to a perceived social requirement. And they've been very open about the fact that they've had very little demand for that product at all.
I think my worry about this is that lenders haven't really given this a lot of thought. When we did some research at the back end of last year about the time that the Community Secretary was talking about more flexible tenancies and longer lease lengths, the majority of lenders who responded to us simply came back with a two-liner saying, we have a maximum 12 months and we have no plans to change that. I don't think there's any demand because I don't think it's offered. And I think that's the conundrum. And I think it's not helpful for the growth of the private rented sector. And I don't think, in a wider sense, it's helpful for society, because I think people need to be able to commit to communities, put down roots, know that they can send their children to school in the local community, knowing that they're going to be able to live there.
Well, in which case, let's. I'm very keen, with such an illustrious panel, to try and get some sense of where you see volumes going this year for the buy-to-let market. So, Stephen, can I get some sort of prediction from you for 2014 in the buy-to-let space?
Well, with the outturn of around 20 billion, I think I'm right in saying for last year, I would be disappointed if we see anything less than about 24 or 25 billion, possibly more.
I wouldn't like to put a figure on it, but I'd agree with Stephen. It'll continue to grow, continue to move forward, and I don't think the political debates around the election will slow that down.
I think in IMLA we're fairly bullish in the sense that the market recovery has speeded up enormously in the last few months, and if you take the last month's lending in December and so forth, you could reasonably expect somewhere between 25 and 30 billion achievable this year, which still sits as low compared to our historic peak at 46 billion. But it's certainly going to ramp up.
Thank you, and John, finally.
Well, I think that's a fairly wide range, 25 to 30, and I think Peter's very safe in that range. What I'd hope, though, is that expansion continues to be achieved in the prudent and conservative manner that we've seen in the recovery of buy-to-let so far.
Fantastic. Well, plenty to think about there. Thanks very much to all our panellists, John, Peter, Richard and Stephen. Thanks for all your thoughts today. Much appreciated. And we hope to see you all again very soon on Mortgage Solutions Television.